The world has changed exponentially since we last connected in our Next Level Leadership series in April and May. We are now in the midst of a storm of epic proportions with uncertainty and unrest staring us down. This new series with Warren Rustand will focus on the leader within us and seek to empower leaders like you to push through this storm and the ones that follow. A big thank you to you for being part of this series. We are all connected through Warren, his leadership, and our gift of togetherness. Incredible conversation and insights that help us and support each other as we grow as leaders. Thank you for your contribution, your questions, your leadership, and your togetherness in these uncertain times. Each week, we introduce Warren. Many of you have seen Warren speak and attend events, and you know how it goes. Something like this. And here's Warren. For all of you that have not met Warren before, Warren Rustand is former CEO of Providence Service Corporation. He served as member of the board of directors for over 50 public, private, and not-for-profit companies. Warren served as appointment secretary to President Ford, global chairman of WPO, co-founder and dean of faculty at the Entrepreneur Organization's EO Leadership Academy. Countless awards, Sports Hall of Fame, White House Fellow, but the award Warren treasures the most is Father of the Year in his hometown of Tucson, Arizona. Just remember, this is a conversation. Please continue to post your questions today and share where you're from. We'd love to know. This live stream will live on his Facebook page, Warren S. Rustand, as well as future episodes, so you can continue the conversation with Warren and, more importantly, with each other. Please share it. You can also find this series on YouTube, Warren S. Rustand. Thank you all for being here. We are all in this together.
Station today. Vote. And that quote is, "And once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked into it. That's what this storm's all about." That's from Haruki Murakami. And I think it's appropriate for our conversation today as we begin talking to understand that this storm is temporary, that it will come to an end, and there will be other storms. But what we learn going through this storm is really about who we will be as we come out the other side and prepare for the next episode in our lives. So as we think about what we're talking about today, the leader within us, weathering the storm, it's getting through the tough times. And you'll recall that I've pointed to the bronze statue over my shoulder that I touch the head of every day as I come into my office. And the title of that is Weathering the Chores. It's getting the job done every day, regardless of what the weather might be. So this is a conversation. It's an opportunity for you to ask questions. It's a time for you to put your thoughts in chat box that we can respond to so that we can have a genuine conversation about where we are in the world and what's going on and how we might be thinking. In preparation for today, I jotted down some ideas and thoughts over a week ago to see if see if they made sense as we think about the pandemic specifically. Now, as you recall, we had 9 previous episodes, and they dealt with, in each episode, a specific concept around leadership, 8 specific concepts, and then 1 session on the crisis we're in. And all of those generated a lot of discussion, a lot of questions, over 400 questions that were generated for us to respond to during the episodes and post-episode. And I appreciate that. You know, as we started into this process around the first week in February, that was 17 weeks ago, 18 weeks ago. 4.5 months have passed and we're still in a pandemic. For those of you who thought this was going to be short-lived and be just a while, a few days, a few weeks. I suspect now you're reassessing. For others of you, you took a longer term view. I know for our family, what seemed an eternity during these 16 or 17 weeks is ongoing. But when our family first met as a family unit back in February, we made a choice about how long we thought this would be and how long our preparation needed to be for as we looked toward what might be the end of this particular pandemic. And we adopted a two-year time frame. We did not believe this was going to be short-lived. We thought this was going to be longer term. And we still hold to that notion that 2 years is probably an interesting time frame. Because you see, what has to happen in the pandemic is we have to have testing of a potential vaccine. We then have to have human trials. We then have to have certification of that by federal authorities. We then have to have wide-scale testing to determine who has the disease, who the carriers of the disease are. And then ultimately we have to have inoculation, first to those who are carriers and sick, and then to others. And so it is a bit of a long haul. This is not going to be a short time frame. I also suggested that the storm we're in affects us all. This is a global pandemic. This is something that is sweeping the world. In some places, it's flattened out and even in decline. In other places, it's rising rapidly and steadily. There are new areas. There are older areas. Even in China, where it started, they thought they'd put a cap on it. And yet Beijing today, as we speak about it, is escalating very dramatically. And so these hotspots break out. And so I'd suggest once again that this is not a short-term time frame. It is a longer-term time frame. So if you're hearing this for the first time, I hope that you will begin to think about how you're going to look longer term and prepare yourself, your families, your extended families, your businesses, and help your communities get through this process. So we have this first storm. It's called the pandemic. I believe we have now entered a second storm that hasn't touched the entire world, but is clearly touching great parts of the world. And this is social unrest, civil disobedience. It's about criminal justice. It's a whole new wave, if you will, for us to deal with during the first wave, which is the pandemic. It may be more pronounced in the United States today, but clearly it has risen to a very important part of discussion and activity in cities around the world. I suspect that will increase, not decrease. I also suspect this is a moment in time, a period in time, where momentum is building in a way that very constructive long-term solutions to something that's been centuries old, discrimination, can be put to rest in a systemic way. There is a huge opportunity for our societies around the world to deal with an issue that's been with us since man here on earth, because we are born into clans and tribes, families, and inevitably there is discrimination that occurs. And it has reached proportions where it must be dealt with in very specific ways. I'm reminded in a conversation I had with Steve Satterwhite last week about a book that I had read many years ago, The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success by Deepak Chopra. And in that book is an interesting statement. The world has a perfect accounting system. When something goes up, something else goes down. The world seeks equilibrium. And I believe where we are in our lives today, we too are seeking equilibrium, because things are going both up and down. And getting a sense of balance during this time is particularly difficult, because we've been isolated, shut down, sheltered in place, right? We've been closed and closeted with our families, which is all good. And we've discovered some new things about our families, which are fantastic. But we have been isolated. And our societies have been reasonably isolated. And even now, as these various communities begin to open up, we're wearing masks, we're social distancing. The world as we know it is changed and will be changed forever in many ways. And so as we think about that process, we seek equilibrium. For many, it's been a real hardship, and it's connected us to our deeper feelings of who we are, what we're about, what our lives doing, what's important in our lives, and finding that deep solitude and isolation for us individually to figure out who we really are is important. And I think in many ways, it's been a time that's been beneficial. It's been helpful. And I think we've also found that if we impose a greater level of discipline, both in large and small things, it's easier to get through this. Make short-term goals, achieve those short-term goals, and then move on to something else. And so it's been a bit easier for us during this pandemic and during this time of social unrest to really find ourselves. And so the first principle I'd like to just mention to you today is the notion that we need to seek a higher level of discipline in all things that we do, large and small. And if we can achieve that, we will find that we have much more success and much more opportunity to grow and develop during this critical time. It seems to me, at least as I think about it, there may be both short-term and long-term motivations that we experience. The short-term motivation is driven principally externally, and it's the book we read, the speaker we hear, the quote we hear. It stimulates us, it inspires us, but only temporarily. And that's generally what comes from an external force or an external influence for our motivation. The longer-term motivation, however, is intentionality, and it's internal completely. It's what drives us. It's our clock. It's our understanding of what's right and wrong. It's our ability to pursue those long-term issues that are critically important to our success. And so we have both short and long-term motivations, one internal, one external. Disruptive moments produce dynamic growth. Let me repeat that. Disruptive moments produce dynamic growth. Some of the really most interesting things that have been developed throughout history have come during times of great crisis. Wars, famines, plagues. Some of the most interesting things that have ever been developed have come at times of great crisis. That's this moment. That's now. That's for you, for your family, for your community and your business. We will see incredible things that will have been developed during this period of time that will become obvious to us over the next few years. And before we're done today, I might mention some specific areas or categories of things that I see changing that could be quite different. The second storm that I mentioned is this notion of social unrest. It's rocking our boat differently. So if we're all in the same storm, but we're all in a different boat, and each of our boats is rocked and rolled differently by different waves. For some, it's finance. For some, it's medicine. For some, it's health. It's scientific. It's all different for each of us. For some, it rocks our family. But this notion of making sure our boat is okay is really important. So this second storm that's hitting is really important. It joins the pandemic in upsetting us, in changing our notion of equilibrium. The second storm is really about right and wrong. It's really about a moral test. It's about our humanity. It's how we treat people. It's how we believe in people. It's how we think about our world and our environment. It's quite different than the pandemic, and yet we're dealing with both of them simultaneously. As we think about our homes, we think about our communities, we think about our businesses, I think there are mystical forces that work in the universe. Some call them natural happenings. Some call them serendipity. Some call them, because of faith, God, or other things. But these mystical forces that work in the universe that align themselves from time to time, that cause us to think differently. And perhaps that's what's happened to us. Perhaps our world was going too fast. Perhaps we were doing too many things. Perhaps we were too stressed, too much under pressure to perform. And the world gave us the pandemic. And the world gave us social unrest. For what reason? I think to learn, to help, to engage, to think about who we are differently, to think about where we're going differently. And I think through that thought process, we will arrive at conclusions that are different. Remember, disruptive moments produce dynamic change and growth. This is true of us, it's true of our families, it's true of our businesses, and everything in which we're engaged. You know, discrimination has been with us a long time, as I said. It's something that many people have had to deal with. And many of us have been engaged in that in different ways. And we need to rethink that whole process in our societies today. It affects virtually all countries and societies on earth. Majority versus minority. Discrimination exists over race, religion, language, ethnicity. We've seen systemic racism in banking, healthcare, finance, housing. It has permeated our societies in many ways. We must rid the world of this evil. We need to understand that we're created equally and that we all have to have equal opportunity. But how do we understand that? I can tell you that not one of us can put ourselves in the shoes of others who are discriminated against. But we need to learn. We need to engage. We need to listen really carefully. And then we need to be about that change. Dante once said the hottest places in hell have been reserved for those people who in times of moral crisis remain neutral. We cannot remain neutral and simply be an observer and a bystander in the process of change. You and I have obligations and accountabilities to be great people, to understand our humanity, and to reach out to others who are hurting and to give them support and empathy, to be certain that we have an appreciation for the world in which others live and how we might improve it, change it, and alter it to make it more fair and to be more honorable to all. So we have a great challenge. Abraham Maslow wrote his principles of hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy of need. And you'll recall that there are 5 levels, and the first level really is food and shelter. And the second level is about security. And those are really what we call the body needs, as I think about them. And then you move from the body needs, we move to belonging and love and self-actualization and self-esteem. And those are really the mental, cognitive, or mind needs. And that's called a mind category as I think about it. Late in life, Maslow suggested there was a 6th level. And that level is transcendence. That's where we understand the higher calling, the higher purpose in life. And I would relate to this time of social unrest to the higher purpose and the higher calling. And that's really about our soul. That's really about who we are deep within us. It's the essence of who we are as human beings. And we have to be certain of that. And we have to be careful about how we manifest that in our societies, with other people, in our interactions, with those with whom we have contact on a daily basis. And so with the body, mind, and soul addressing Maslow's higher needs, it really is the alignment. That's the second great principle that I want to leave you with today. It's the alignment of body, mind, and soul that makes our world work, that really helps us go through the process. It makes our world a better place. Finally, let me suggest a couple of things that might help us in our discussion. We need to have a long-term focus. We need to have clarity of vision. As we go through the pandemic and the social unrest, and then what I think is a third wave, at least here in the United States, will be a presidential campaign that will play into the pandemic and the social unrest and create this interesting chance to find equilibrium. And so we're going to be bombarded over the next many months with all of these 3 waves. We have to think about what the long-term consequences of this and what our long-term actions are going to be, how we're going to behave, how our families are going to get through this process. But we need to stop the glorification of busy. We need to avoid the distractions. We need to become more productive. We allowed ourselves to get sucked into a world of just busyness instead of productivity. Now it's time to call that time out with the pandemic and the social unrest and the other things we've considered, to really look deeply at who we are and what we want to achieve. So I think we have a chance to slow ourselves down, to really focus on what's important, not what's urgent, and finally to discover our core purpose. And when we live to our purpose, we really live to that higher calling. We live to that greater intentionality. And I would say that the following 4 things is what we need to do. First, we need to rededicate and revitalize and commit to our family. We need to reconsider and reorganize our businesses. We need to revitalize and recreate a just society. And we need to calibrate and recalibrate and revision our personal lives. That's what this time of quiet is all about. So the third step and the third principle that I would leave with you today is the notion that unless we make long-term progress and decisions and policy, without innovation and creativity at this time in history, we are left to always fix temporary problems. And those temporary problems will always cause unrest and unjust societies. So what's the new normal? I'm asked that a lot. We've left what we considered normal, and people talk a lot about the new normal. I think the new normal is uncertainty, and it's uncertainty for a prolonged period of time. Just as I think the pandemic and social unrest will be with us for a while, I think too there will be a period of uncertainty as we transition substantially in some categories that we need to give thought to. And let me suggest what some of those categories might be. I was just making some notes yesterday about these. The first is medicine and telemedicine. There are many who will never go back to see doctors, but will be diagnosed using technology. Education, there will be a percentage of people that, and students, we have 55 million students just in the United States alone. Maybe 10, 15, 20, 25% of them will never go back in the classroom. They'll have online learning. Geographic location, to be close to our jobs, is now not as important. Geography is history. We can live anywhere we want and still work online and be productive, be efficient, be effective. 3D printing, just-in-time delivery for products and services, is going to change a great deal. Raw materials may be transported on rail and trucks, but 3D printing in local environments will allow for technology to drive products at point of sales. Perhaps we can flatten the income disparity curves. Perhaps we can get on top of discrimination, racial, wage, gender. There are opportunities for us as we think about the new normal, which does bring uncertainty, but will allow us to address in a long-term way some of the significant issues that we currently face. So I hope this is helpful to stimulate some discussion, some thoughts. I hope you'll put your questions in the chat box and we can respond to those in a way that will be helpful to you. So I'd like to ask for Winnie to intercede and intervene, and if she would ask questions and pose those questions, it'd be great. I look forward to talking with you throughout these questions, and we'll answer as many as we can. Thank you for considering my thoughts today.
Well, thank you, Warren, always. Couple of places that we have representing today. We have Kansas City, Chicago, we have San Francisco, Dallas, Knoxville. We have Nepal, Nebraska, Reno, Tahoe. Thanks everybody for being here. The first question, Warren, is, so when COVID started, we all worked on working in our businesses again, right? Working in instead of working on. How do we get back to working on our businesses? Like you mentioned, the glorification of busy. What do we do?
Well, I think it's too easy for us to get sucked into the short-term minutia, particularly in times of crisis, because we have to fix stuff to stay in the game and to keep our businesses solvent. And there are many businesses that have failed. If we think about the magnitude, just look at the United States alone for a second. In the United States, all types of unemployment, including those who have stopped working for jobs, is about 40 million people. About 1 in 4 people are unemployed at the present time. And so there are lots of people who are unemployed. There's more talent unemployed today than we've seen since the Great Depression in the United States. So for those who are growing, expanding their business, or trying to upgrade talent, this is a marvelous time to do that. But we have to step from planning and working on our business day to day, worrying about cash flow, revenue, people, those kinds of things, to spend part of our day thinking about the longer term. Where are we going? Because things will get better. Wherever we are in the world today, things will get better. And as they get better, what is our long-term view, our vision, our clarity about where we're going? So spend some time, yes, working on the minutia, the detail, you got to do it when businesses are in trouble. But also spend time, pause, call time out, spend an hour, 2, 3 on thinking about where you're going longer term. And I would say not just your business, but your family. Your family's been cloistered now for 17, 18 weeks. It's great. It's wonderful. We get to hug and kiss you. And it also drives you crazy sometimes, right? So you got to have the opportunity to think longer term for your family. And then for your community, how are you going to serve going forward? What's your servant leadership going to look like in your community? Are you just going to write the check, or you're going to really engage? And I believe if you really engage, it addresses the other issue we talked about today, which is social unrest. If we really engage with marginalized communities, if we really engage with people that we don't know and don't have experience with, we begin to address and learn about the greater issue, which is the humanity of all of us.
Thank you, Warren. Next question. You talked about the rocking boat, weathering the storm. The question is, what do we do if we want to get in another boat?
Well, and in some cases, our boats have holes in them and they're leaking really badly, and we need to find another boat. And I would say if we're rowing a boat right now that's doing pretty well, we need to look around us to see who needs to get in another boat. We need to try to help others. I told the story before of a young man that owns restaurants here in our town, and he had to close one of those. And he was thinking about closing his only other restaurant. He's a good friend. We love his family and we know him well. And so we decided that we would rally around him and our family, 28 members of us here, and friends of our families that love his food. And so we order food from him every day. We also order food through him so that he can mark that up and keep his employees working. Now, he's a great young man. He's got a great family. We believe he's going to survive this. And his boat was leaking badly. His boat, he needed to get out of and get in another boat. But we were able to construct a solution for his boat such that it wasn't going to sink. He could stay in his boat and we could support him and uplift him. And I think we have to find those opportunities to help others during our own crisis, because we'll feel better about our circumstance if we help those who are even in greater need. So, yep, there are times when our boat looks like it's sinking and we got to plug it up as best we can. But if we have people around us who will reach out and help us repair our boats, or even allow us to get in their boat for a while, then we can all make it. We can all get through this.
Thank you. We have a question from Jamie Duragi. How do we recalibrate ourselves to be ready to reinvest in our communities with a new perspective?
Jamie, thank you. That's a great question. I think that what's going on around the world today, protest, march, talking about lofty goals, ambitions for people, is a really critical time in the history of the world. We have waited too long. We have suffered too much. And the people who are being discriminated against have gone through a very difficult period of time. And we need to do what's right here. I think we all have to step forward to engage, even if we're uncomfortable, even if we don't know what we're doing. Pure intent is okay. If we have real content and a pure heart, and we go out to help other people and learn from other people, it's good. One of the most important things is not to arrive in your community and propose solutions. First, find out what the problem is. Listen carefully to those who are suffering. Listen carefully to those who have suffered from discrimination at the hand of others. And then with them, let's together as communities form and create policies and solutions that work for everyone, not for a few. There are many of us on this call who have had success, who have run businesses, who are doing well. And many of us have been touched by the pandemic and social unrest. But all too often we exist in our own narrow world, and we don't spend nearly enough time in understanding the expanded world, the extended world, and everything that's going on around us. I can tell you that when I was playing basketball in college at the university, we went to check into a hotel one night in a city I will not name. And as my African-American teammates and I approached the desk to check into the hotel, we were advised that our Black teammates would not be able to stay there. Well, we all exited the hotel and we all went and found a place where we could all stay. But that was an important time for me to feel the pain and the experience of my Black teammates at that moment in time. We had long hours of discussion about that. That was the first time that I had seen that form of discrimination. And it taught me great lessons, that there are people every day who have a much harder time than we have. So Jamie, I would suggest that we go into places that are uncomfortable, where we don't have perfect knowledge, where we don't have control. And let's learn, listen. And then let's act in concert with our brothers and sisters in ways that benefit all of us.
All right, next question. This is from Andrea Herrera in Chicago. In a time like this, how do we create intentionality?
Well, you're doing it, Andrea. My goodness, you're having a fantastic time. You had a business that was doing really well. You were looking forward to 2020 being your best year ever until the pandemic hit. And Andrea and I, by the way, have been great friends for a long time. And then all of a sudden, the floor got jerked out from under you, and your business essentially went to zero. But acting with intent and intentionality, and with friends supporting you, your business made a pivot through your good thinking. And you now are engaged in a new business and doing well. And I think that's remarkable. I think your ability to transition, to pivot, is a real credit to you, and a credit to your friends who supported you in that process. I know you're going to do really well. I've been the recipient of your new products and services, and they're fantastic. May I say they're fantastic. And I've recommended you to multiple other people, and I hope you'll be hearing from them soon. So you're a classic example of acting with intentionality. You could have sat by and said, woe is me, whining and crying. I can't do my business. I'm upside down. And there's time for that, but that only can last about 5 or 10 minutes. And then you got to get on with the rest of your life. And you proved how to do that. So Andrea, I think you're just dynamite, and you've done a great job. And I know scores of other business leaders like you who have made the pivot, made the change, engaged in a new direction, and are fighting and struggling to build a new business. And I admire you so much for doing that.
Such a great, inspiring story. Next question. How do we engage with those who are disengaged?
Yeah, I think by example. I think the greatest service that we can give to others is our own example. Let's model the behavior that we want to see in others. Let's do what we want others to do. We can talk with people, but in the end, talking only does so much. You and I can have this conversation, but when we walk away from this conversation, it's what we do that matters. The world is not built by those people who feel. The world is built by people who do. I was born the son of a doer. My father's the hardest working man I've ever met. And I got to be with him all the time, every day on the farm, just watching him do things, and he would engage me with him. Soon I found there was great joy in doing, getting the job done. And he modeled that behavior every day, and I learned from him. I think people have to learn from us, our employees, our children, our friends. If they are disengaged, if they're just watching the parade go by, let's get them in the parade. But let's do it by showing them how, not telling them how, but showing them how. And when they can follow our example, they'll have a great experience just as we're having it.
Awesome. Next question. Let's see, kind of a broad question. What specific things should we be doing as leaders in this crisis today? There are a few crises that we're talking about. So
yeah, the obvious answer is to lead and not stand by, not to shrink from leadership. Leaders, when stuff is going bad, leaders step forward and take full accountability and responsibility. And when things are going great, we can step back and give the credit to others. But people want us to lead in times of crisis. Our family needs leadership. Our businesses need leadership. There is so much uncertainty out there. There's so much agony and despair and hurt that's going on right now by millions of people who are unemployed, who don't even have the cash to buy groceries, are worried about their mortgage payment, have lost their cars, right? So many people live a paycheck away from disaster. And so we need to lead. We need to help people see this through. We need to use our assets and resources to benefit others. Partner in the community, idea share in the community, serve in the community. And even though we may be hurting, there's still homeless shelters and food banks, opportunities to serve in many ways with not-for-profits. Go to those not-for-profits. Be a social entrepreneur. Go out there and show them what social entrepreneurship is and what entrepreneurial leadership is, that you care about your community, you care about others. Start with your next door neighbors. Start with people in your immediate community. There are so many ways that we can be helpful. So I'd say as leaders, lead. Don't shrink from it. Go to it. Embrace it. And then show what you're made of by doing the right things.
Thank you, Warren. One more question, and then we'll wrap with the top three. Kind of another interesting question. What are the mystical forces in the universe up to anyway?
Good question. What are the mystical forces up to anyway? I think the mystical forces are always there and always present. We call them different things depending upon our religion or our families or where we were born, that sort of thing, right? So it's this notion that those mystical forces are out there. We may not always know what they are or what to call them depending upon where we are in our own journey, but I think they help us. And if we listen carefully to those mystical forces, I think they help guide us and direct us and bring us to good solutions. The one thing I'm certain of, having lived many decades, the one thing I'm certain of is that we are promised adversity. We will always be challenged. We will always have the chance to rise to that challenge or shrink from it or deny it. We are in a period of great personal challenge. Will we rise to it? Are we capable of it? Can we meet force with force? I believe we can. I believe we will. And I believe we will be better for it. So as we close today, let's remind ourselves of the three things that I discussed earlier.
First, increase our levels of discipline in everything that we're doing. Second, alignment around the mind, body, and soul. Be certain that we're driven by our purpose and that we attack our purpose with passion, which will align our mind, body, and soul. And finally, the third, our failure to make long-term decisions and progress. Without creativity or solutions, we will always be fixing the short-term or the temporary issue. Therefore, what do I suggest? I suggest the new normal is going to be a period of uncertainty where we simply won't know what the outcome is going to be for multiple months. Prepare for the longer term and be surprised if it's shorter than that.